that whatever your past holds, and again, I don't know what it holds, but whatever it holds, we have to face it with faith. For Joseph, at the age of 30, his past held his brothers turning on him and selling him into slavery. His past held that even when he was trying to do the best that he could do and to be a man of character, that it got him into trouble. And he found himself falsely accused, and then he found himself in prison. And even though he tried to do the best and he was shown favoritism in the prison, he was still in prison. It's not much of a comfort to be the favorite prisoner, right? I mean, you're still in prison, and it's where Joseph found himself. And yet all through this moment, all through these years, from 17 to 30, he never loses his faith. He never gives up on God. He always walks humbly before the Lord and strives to do what it is that he feels like God is calling him to do in the moment. He faced his past with faith. And as he finds himself freed from prison, and as he interprets a dream from the Pharaoh that no one else could interpret, and as he lets the Pharaoh know that the dream means that there's going to be 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine, we see Joseph's story for the first time in his life begins to take a turn. And all of a sudden there's a glimmer of hope. It says in Genesis 41, verse 50, before the years of famine came, so after the years of feast, after the years of plenty, so 7 years, 2 sons were born to Joseph by Asenath, daughter of Potiphera, priest of On. Joseph gets married. He has 2 baby boys. I mean, yeah, he didn't get to have a marriage with all his family present. He didn't get to be married in his hometown like he had always probably dreamed and thought it would look like. It looked different than what he had probably imagined it would when he was a young kid, but still he was getting the chance to have a family, to have a wife, to have sons. And it says in verse 51 that Joseph named his firstborn Manasseh and said, "It is because God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household." Joseph's looking at his little boy. And man, I tell you, as a dad, when you're just getting to hold your kid for the first time, it's such an amazing experience. And as he looks down at that son, it's as though he realizes what God has done in the moment. That God has allowed him to forget all of these last years of his life. His 20s that were filled with such desperate, hard moments in his life. Of being sold into slavery, of being falsely accused, of finding himself in prison, that it seems as though God is allowing him to forget as he's looking into this tiny face. And you know, there's nothing like the face of a young child. And so he names him as such. God has made me forget all of my trouble and all of my father's household. He begins to let go. And I think if we want to have victory over our past, and when I say this, I don't say this lightly. And I don't pretend like this is easy. And I'm not for a moment to try to cast a vision that, within the next few minutes, you should be good to go. You heard the sermon point. Why can't you apply it to your life? I understand that what I'm about to say can be extremely difficult to hear, and sometimes even in moments like these can bring a little bit of anger because you don't know what I've gone through. But as I look at Joseph's life and as I read the scriptures, I think it's something that we have to wrestle with as believers. Because Joseph was able to forgive and let go. Now that was a lot. Even as we speak that, although we're talking about Joseph, the names that popped into your mind are not Reuben. They're not Joseph's brothers. They're not these people that you know Joseph would have had to forgive. But no. When we say forgive and let go, isn't it amazing how all of a sudden the names that immediately come to our minds are the names from that past? The names that we've wrestled with for so long. And whenever we hear the word forgive, it's like we want to forgive, but man, you don't know what they've done, or you don't know what took place, or you don't know what I've done, and you don't know how I inflicted damage, and how could forgiveness ever find its way there? And then to walk afresh and to actually let it go? Only by the grace of God, right? But yet we see it's what Joseph does, because it's one thing to forgive and let go when you don't have to see the people anymore, right? I mean, when you live in Nashville and they live in Alabama, or when you live in Egypt and they live in Canaan, and there's no chance that your paths are going to cross. But that's not how the story goes for Joseph. In fact, the reason I know that he is able to forgive and let go, and the reason I'm not ascribing that something to him that was not there, is because we see what happens when he comes face to face with those he had to forgive. Just 2 years later. So do the math. I'm not a math wizard, but I can do math. Manasseh was 2. 2 years later. In the midst of the famine, 2 years into the famine, remember there was going to be 7 years. 2 years in, all of Joseph's family have run out of food. And they have come to Egypt because of the wisdom that God has given Joseph to store up in the 7 years of plenty. Now everyone's coming to Egypt for food. And sure enough, one day, on that dusty road that led into Egypt, Joseph sees his brothers. And he recognizes them immediately, but the story tells us that they do not recognize him. And there's these things that transfer, these back and forth, and Joseph doesn't immediately let himself be known because he wants to know more about the family. How's Dad? Is there anybody else around? I mean, what's going on? And as he questions his brother under the guise of disguise, he finds out who they are, what's taken place. He sends them back. They come forward, and we pick up in Genesis 45, verse 1. It says, "Then Joseph could no longer control himself before all of his attendants, and he cried out, 'Have everyone leave my presence.' So there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers." And here's the moment. Here's the moment that what had happened in Joseph's life 2 years ago, as he's naming his little boy that God has allowed me to forget. He's allowed me to truly forgive. He's allowed me to put the past behind me and to walk in a new spirit, to no longer be bound by all of the things, to no longer be defined by all of the things that once defined me, but to walk in a new life. It happens. In Genesis 45, verse 2, it says, "And he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him, and all of Pharaoh's household heard about it." It wasn't a few tears. It was all of the grief and the pain. It was all of the years of the hurt. It was everything that had taken place, and all of a sudden he's able to just let it out and weep so loud that everyone hears. No one is in the dark. And Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still living?" But his brothers were not able to answer them because they were terrified at his presence. They don't know how he's going to respond. It all's coming at them so quickly. And then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come close to me." And when they had done so, he said, "I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed, and do not be angry with yourselves." I mean, how gracious is that statement? "Do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you." And then in verse 15, get this. "And he kissed all his brothers and wept over them." Kissed all of them. He kissed the oldest, who had been the voice of reason, who had got him not just killed, but was able to get him sold into slavery. He kissed all the ones that had said, "Let's just kill him and be done with it." He kissed the very ones that when they saw him afar off began to plot and to scheme. He kisses and weeps over all of them. I love that finality of the situation. That no one was left uncovered. That no one was left in the corner. That everyone got to experience the forgiveness of Joseph in that moment. No one left and thought, "Well, I don't even know what he thinks about me. I mean, I saw what he did and what he said to you guys." But no. Everyone left knowing where Joseph stood. As Joseph sees his brothers, as he's filtering all of these things that is happening, as he's speaking what he knows to be true, that you meant it to harm me, but God meant it for good. He meant it so that I could be salvation. He meant it that I could save. Not just you, but everyone. That I'm convicted in my life at the times that I haven't been able to see, and I haven't believed that God was doing something greater, even in the midst of my pain. What I think Joseph does, something that I think that we all have to lean into, is that we have to trust the pain will have a purpose. Again, if we serve a risen Savior, if we serve a living God, if we serve one who is above all, if we serve one who is able to take and to restore, if we serve that type of God, then we trust that even the things that the enemy means for harm in our lives, that God can take them in a way in which only God can. This does not happen apart from a relationship with Jesus Christ. That when we have that relationship with God, that God can take even that very pain and that He can transform it into using it for a purpose for His glory and for His honor.